But I think you'll understand in a minute why we, the Stewardship Committee, wanted him to take a few more minutes to tell his story. It's a story of greatness. Peter.
Okay, let's start by just saying I'm extremely nervous, because then that takes care of it. Typically, if I say that, I feel much better. So, I've told this story actually a number of times, and typically I start out by saying my name's Pete and I'm an alcoholic, in churches usually, but not in front of non-alcoholics. So you might enjoy it. And Susan, what she said about the poser, it reminded me, I grew up in Chappaqua, and, my parents were very successful, very, very hardworking people, and they also were very alcoholic. And, we lived with a lot of secrets. There was abuse, there was neglect, but if you looked on the outside, it looked like a wonderful life. And my parents worked very hard to keep that image. And nobody knew what was going on in the home. There were concerned teachers, people who could see my behavior outside of the home that they were troubled by, and I typically tried to stay away from my house as much as I could, and I became an extrovert, which I believe I still am today. And I made a lot of friends, but I really struggled in school. In life, I forgot to look at my watch, I'm sorry. Okay. I had a hard time, and, my parents did the best they could with what they had, and I believe that now. For a very long time, I was very angry and bitter about my childhood, but a lot of people had it a lot worse than I did, and I remember that now. So struggled through high school, started drinking at a young age, and I shared this morning that when I first drank, that's when I felt okay. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I felt like this was the answer for me. And it did work for a while, until it stopped. And it stopped probably when I was 16 or 17 years old. It was apparent that there was a serious problem. My parents were aware of it. The high school, Horace Greeley High School, was aware of it, and they had an intervention, and they sent me to Arms Acres. And I was at Arms Acres. It was back in the days when insurance would pay for 3 months, so I was up there for 3 months. And I gained an education on alcoholism, when I was 16 or 17 years old. And and I got out, and I went to an AA meeting in Chappaqua, and it was back in 1987, where they were still smoking in the church, and there was a bunch of, from my view, crotchety old men there, and I was a 17-year-old kid, and I remember saying, I can't believe I'll never be able to drink again. I shared that with the group, and one of these old men got up and said, I can't believe you have the audacity to think you're going to live another day if you drink. And I went home, and I looked up the word audacity, and I never went back. Well, not for many years. So anyway, and so it went, and my disease progressed, and the trouble progressed, and I started to get in trouble with the law, all DWIs, and I had my first incident in North Dakota. I did a lot of stuff out west, and I wasn't convicted of a DWI, but it was a DWI. I was driving drunk. I just didn't get convicted of it. The second one was in Colorado. Instead of dealing with it, they wanted me to go to outpatient rehab. I fled the state because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. My third one was in New York. I came back here, and that's the one that really, I realized I had a serious problem, and I had to do something about it. I was facing homelessness. I was in a lot of trouble, and I had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, I found out, in 1999. They said I had bipolar disorder, and I didn't want to accept it. I didn't accept the diagnosis, and consequently, I struggled for a number of years coming in and out of the Alcoholics Anonymous program, trying to stay sober, with some success, 6 to 8 months, but I would always drink when my depression became crippling. And that was the answer for me, because otherwise I felt like I would, might hurt myself. And so it went. And then I got another DWI in 2003. Of course, lots of trouble. You would think, well, obviously he's not going to do this again. I mean, it's serious consequences. I was looking at a felony, and you would think, well, and I believe that I will not do this again. I won't do it again, and I did it again. I did it again in 2010, and that was a life-changing moment for me. I lost my job that day. I lost my apartment that day. I lost my mom and dad, stopped talking to me. I was homeless. I was truly homeless. I had nowhere to go. I ended up in the emergency drop-in shelter in White Plains called Open Arms. I spent 3 or 4 months there, and then was put into the Westchester County shelter in Valhalla. It's called the VOA, Volunteers of America runs it. And while I was there, my parents died 2 weeks apart in 2011. And if I can tell you that, first of all, I was hopeless. I had no hope left. I figured my life was actually over. And then my parents died, and the whole thing seemed like a very bad dream, Growing up in Chappaqua, I didn't see this as where I wanted to end up. And I really, I didn't believe that I could get to this point. And then, of course, I went to jail because of the DWI. And again, it was another surrealistic, eye-opening experience for me. I spent 7 months in the county jail here because of that felony DWI. And I'll say I haven't driven in almost 8 years. New York State wisely has decided that maybe I shouldn't drive for a while. I got out. I went to California to go to rehab. I drank again, and I triggered a disease in my body called lupus anticoagulant syndrome from my chronic alcoholism. It's a blood clotting disorder, and I had a blood clot in my foot, and I lost my leg, as you guys probably have seen. So enough of the bad stuff. Let's move on, because you get the idea, right? I came back to New York. I had a moment of clarity, we call it. I wasn't dying, and I wasn't living, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I asked God for help, and God answered. And I came back to New York, and I got connected with Alcoholics Anonymous again. I moved to Tarrytown, and I met some wonderful people. And there's a guy named Chip. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he kept bugging me to go to the morning prayer here. And I was confirmed Catholic at St. John and Mary's Church in Chappaqua, and that was 8th grade. I really never went back. I don't think I ever went back once. And, so church wasn't in the wheelhouse for me, as it were. And but I finally acquiesced. I said, all right, Chip, I'll go to this prayer thing that you're talking about. And I got to tell you, immediately, things changed for me when I walked into this church. And the warmth I felt and the love I feel. And there's some of my prayer folks behind me right now. And I feel it. I feel the warmth right now. And, the love that kind of poured out, and I never experienced, and the sense of community and family that I've got from this church was unbelievable. And when I say I was hopeless and I never thought I'd walk in a church again, believe me, I was. Something changed. All of a sudden, I felt like this is something maybe that would work for me, and I started coming here. And as you guys have seen me, sporadically at first, and then I became involved with the Altar Guild. And then I started volunteering at the food pantry. And then I started doing other things. Now I'm part of Christian Formation. Matthew, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. And this whole thing has been so enriching for my life. And every time I live right down on South Broadway, every time I walk past here, I kid you not, I just feel warm. This church has done so many wonderful things for me, and I can't tell you how much it means to me. And that's why you see me here every Sunday. And I'm here when I can. I should say, this is a very important part of the story. So the guy who fired me 7, 8 years ago called me. He heard I got 2 years of sobriety. I'm almost 3 years sober. He heard I got 2 years of sobriety. He called me. Thank you. And he offered me my job back. you know? And I mean, talk about just, and I was blown away. And he hired a driver for me to do my job, you know? And it's challenging, you know, to have someone else driving me around. But everyone, actually, Chip, there's a lot of people, Debbie drives me around. But anyway, so everyone drives me around, right? And everyone's willing to help me when I'm helping myself and helping others. And that's what this is really all about, you know? So thank you for letting me be up here, and I love all of you. Thank you.